And good morning to the first BIPoC Climate Justice Conference. I'm very happy to see you all here. I'm super honored to share my tea this morning with three amazing guests. I hope also our audience, you're prepared with some tea to join our conversation. And actually I just want to start right away. My name is Ivi Obulor. I'll be the moderator for today, trying to facilitate our discussion around climate history, climate justice history, around some cup of tea. And we're just trying to share some thoughts about this movement that is so important for us all. And I actually don't want to start with introducing our speakers because I think I don't even know how, because they're so inspiring. I went through all their bios and I can just recommend to all the audience that you do it as well, and that we just really use the time to discuss and to exchange thoughts. I want to give the word to you, Brototi. Just jump in right away with the first question. You have been working with the Environmental Justice Atlas and specifically coal struggles in India. You've also been very active in the degrowth community and the climate justice discussions in Europe. So what do you think about the similarities and differences in the multiple narratives of environmental justice and climate justice that is dominant today, both in India and in Europe? So it's a very big question, but I think we can start big and then try to get more concrete.
Thank you so much. For this question, and also for having the initial check-in and for creating this space to have this conference for BIPoCs working in climate justice. So what I'm going to do to answer this question is basically share a little bit of the experiences that I have working with climate justice, both in India and in Europe. And I would try to kind of draw out the similarities and differences from my experience. So not talking from what the theory says, but more from what I have seen in the fieldwork, no? So in Europe, we hear a lot about climate justice, blockadia, the different ways in which we need to stop fossil fuel for the narrative of climate justice. And so when I started my PhD here in 2017, this was an idea which is so present in the everyday of working against fossil fuel and coal that I didn't question it too much till I went to do fieldwork in India, when I had already read about certain conflicts against coal which were using a narrative of climate justice. Like I could see one or two articles where this narrative was being used. And in most of the cases where these cases had a climate justice narrative, you could see involvement of more or less international NGOs which have the broad umbrella. For example, Greenpeace in India, 350.org. So you could look at the cases. So I looked at the cases that they cited in their website and went to go and talk with the people. And when I went to talk with the people, the main concerns which kept coming up were not climate justice, but were about issues of territorial rights, were about issues of livelihood, about pollution, about sacred cultural values and what a coal mine coming up in that region would do, about saving of the common wetlands. So then the more I started speaking with people, the more I came to know that the real the primary motivations were something quite different. And then the question which came to my mind was that maybe in the context of India specifically, but we can think of Global South more generally, it makes sense to look at what are the driving forces behind protests against fossil fuel in specific geopolitical context. And maybe then a more radical climate justice movement would keep those into account and try to make the bridges by looking at these, like it would still be climate justice, but but it would be more about what is it that the people are saying, and not imposing a narrative from the top down. So this was one of the main differences that I found, that once we go to India, the activists are not talking about climate justice as much as about other topics, whereas in Europe, one of the main reasons for stopping in Germany the the lignite mining and the coal plants is climate justice. So I think for the first round, I'm going to stop with these experiences.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, it sounds like climate justice in India, or from a perspective of the global south, has to be always thought intersectional in
Yeah, exactly.
from the
Yeah.
beginning, if I try to sum up what you say.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll hand over to Peter. I also saw your teacup already prepared. Welcome. Um, yeah, for you, I want to start with a different question to just bring up some food for thoughts to then see where our discussion leads us to. So you were present in the commemoration action on November 9 and remembering the death of Ogoni activists 25 years ago. So why do you think remembering them today here in Germany is important and relevant? And also, I imagine that our audience, not all of them actually know what happened and why it's important. So I think maybe it would be great if you could also give us a bit of a broader context to understand better. The stage is yours.
Oh, okay. Thank you for having me. Actually, we had an event commemorating the death of Ken Saro-Wiwa and eight other Ogoni activists in Nigeria were hanged um, 25 years ago. And one could be, one would imagine, why is it so important that we have to remember these heroes? It's all about environmental justice, and it's about letting the world know that 25 years after hanging these innocent activists on orders by the multinational oil company Shell, who directly ordered the arrest, the prosecution, the torture, and the hanging of these innocent people. 25 years after, Shell is still not held accountable for this heinous crime against humanity, against peace. And it's also very important to note that 25 years after, the situation in Ogoniland, the situation in Niger Delta has not even improved. And despite democracy in Nigeria since 1999. So under a military dictatorship, these men were hanged 25 years ago, but now we have democracy in Nigeria. And um, I feel that it is something we have to start talking about. And not only talking about it, we have to be loud about, we have to get louder about it. Because I feel that these people, that the white minority, because the white forms the minority worldwide, um, are paying deaf ears, have been paying deaf ears to our complaints, to our demands for over 500 years. Our people have been exploited and continue to be exploited. The environment has been damaged. The means of livelihood of the people in these regions have been taken away from them, the right to exist. So I feel that this is the time that we have to start talking about, you know, holding such multinational companies like Shell, Chevron, like Monsanto, like Bayer, like, I don't know, in Latin America, you know, we have a whole bunch of all these environmental criminals. And we need to set up a campaign to hold these CEOs accountable. This is my main motivation of course, I do it every year in different cities to remember my hero, Ken Saro-Wiwa. I represented his organization here in Germany, the Mossop, where he was alive. And I led the anti-share campaign in the 90s here, which was very successful, and so on and so forth. And I feel that it is very important for us not only to talk about it. I'm sorry, I'm just getting a phone, call. Not only to talk about it, but create strategies like this coalition. There is this coalition between African countries and Latin America. It's called Oil Watch. You understand? We need to build up more of these networks. You understand? To exert pressures on the politicians who like to make us feel that they love Africa, you understand? But for over 500 years, nobody is listening to us. Our people are dying every day. There is hunger everywhere. There are diseases, caused by environmental devastation and climate change. And we are the ones that own the raw materials. We are the ones that even suffer most because we own raw materials. So we need to start talking about it. That was my motivation this year again, to say we need to do something to remember these heroes.
Thank you, Peter. I think actually you joining this conference today is already like super important for building these networks you're talking about. So thank you very much for these empowering, but also at the same time, just very frustrating words. And I want to hand over to our third guest in the round, Ime. Welcome, good morning. I hope you have your tea ready. So you have been active also, as we all are probably, in amplifying the Black people's struggle against colonial oppression and their role in climate justice struggle. And you've drawn a lot of attention to the uneven attention to the activists of the Global South, actually. So could you explain for us a bit, why did you feel the urge to do it? I think actually Peter explained already also very good, but maybe from your perspective. And also, when did you decide you would start telling that narrative? So what made you see the urge?
Yeah, I think I saw the urge, or I felt the urge when I started, that was in the context of my studies, I started looking into the effects of climate change, and of course also the injustice, all of the injustices behind it, but coming about kind of what felt at the time like hidden information. Obviously, it's hidden in things that many of us never read and are not meant for necessarily for our eyes or for our communities, to see how Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color are going to be so much more impacted by the effects of climate change. And that's really not a topic so much in the narrative of the West. I was reminded of, I mean, you can look at the numbers for how many people are going to die potentially, how many people will be forced to migrate, and this is all out there. You can look at the UN's data and so on and so forth. And for that, I felt very much reminded of, how Extinction Rebellion speaks of this extinction, and one of the criticisms from communities, Black communities, communities of color, Indigenous communities, is that, like Peter said, 500 years, we've faced so many extinctions, and that this is also another extinction event, potentially, not just for ecologies, but obviously also for people who depend on these ecologies, and for frontline communities who face also like structural racism and systemic racism, and therefore bear the brunt of these impacts. And so for me, what I read in these documents is like, you know, stories we will never hear, languages we will never hear, songs that will never be sung again, really, at the end of the day when we think about it. And to speak about or to center this kind of injustice, because that's, again, most of the times when we hear about climate change and so on and so forth, it's like we have to save the planet. But, you know, again, there's a save the planet on whose cost, you know, who will bear the cost for saving the planet. There's like so many continuities of racism, of colonialism, and I've felt like our communities really need to know more about that. And like Peter said, centering people who have fought, like Ken Saro-Wiwa or the Mossop, who have fought about these injustices is really important, also for us in the global north, because we have to sort of reclaim environmental justice and reclaim climate justice because we haven't been part of the narrative. We haven't been part of the representation, you know, we're not part of the imagery when it's about, at least in the West, about environmental movements and so on and so forth. So I think it's important that we remember these fights, the history, really a long history of fights against environmental and climate destruction.
Yeah, thank you, Ime, for sharing your perspective. I actually just want to go right back to you also, Peter, adding on what Ime said regarding the long history. So you talk about ecocides, say that the people in Africa have been fighting for climate justice for 500 years, and not only the last, let's say, like 30 to 40 years. So yeah, to just like give a broader framework to what Ime said, why you do frame it in such a way, and in that formulation, then like this climate justice has a different meaning for you if you connect it to the long history.
Mm-hmm. I was just, you know, I got into this a couple of days ago, you know, and I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I just checking my library, I just found a book from a comrade. I don't know if you've seen it, from a comrade, from Nemo Bassi. Nemo Bassi, I don't know if you know him. He was former president of Friends of the Earth. In Germany here, we call them BUND. And, you know, to cook a continent, destructive extraction and the climate crisis in Africa. I would recommend that. It's just, I like to recommend books that are not so big, you know, but compact and explains a lot. So I'm not just because he's a comrade, but I think I can recommend that. And it explains the fact that, I mean, my explanation about this is we've been getting the whole story wrong. And that's why that's why they've been able to crop us out of the whole picture. You know, we believe that we can make an impact. We used to believe, because since the table is turning, I must confess, we used to believe that we can make an impact in and with their system. So we imbibed a history that is only designed to keep the system of exploitation and destruction of environment, exploitation of people, and the destruction of environment, to keep it alive. So we've been part of this system for so long. So we were not able to create our own narrative. And the arrival of the white man, permit me to use this word, the arrival of the white man in Africa is the beginning of climate environmental injustice in Africa. Because with the arrival of the white man, of course, they were almost all men that came first. So destroyed or created or distorted the traditional economic system, industrial system, social system, legal system, all based, all these traditional values that were based on to sustain the environment, to create a harmony between man, woman, and the environment. In most parts of Africa, it even became a religious, a dogmatic rule that people had to abide with, that when you plant a seed, there are things you have to do to keep the earth safe, sound for the next season, and so on and so forth. So they came with their system and told us that our system was not good. And now what we are realizing now is that this same white man is telling us that we need to, they have to change this system. So that's why I always say the system of the white man is dead. I didn't say it. Some people, the white people are saying it. They are not using my words, but we are saying the same thing. So excuse me to say that if we now have to follow up the chronology of happenings from over 500 years to date, from enslavement of our forefathers and foremothers, the colonial time, up to what people call neo-colonialism, which I prefer to say is colonial continuity. And you will find out that Africa has actually been cooked in such a way that the white man can eat and eat fat and alone. And respecting the values of the people would have been the best way to keep the environment intact. But capitalism, the European form of capitalism, created what I would call, I'm trying to be very careful in the choice of my words.
But I think you don't have to. I think here's a space where you actually can share what you think. So there's
people know me. I don't, but I don't know I'm not scared of what I say, but because I just don't want to hurt anybody's feeling. Now, okay. Now, let's take the issue of Second World War, which we call the second colonialism. If you go through the history as written by blacks, not by whites, as told by blacks, not by whites, you will definitely know that Africa was used once again to fight a war. What is the implication of that? Because it was the Second World War that led to the introduction of monoculture in Africa. And monoculture in agriculture, we all know, is toxic.
No.
And before, let me go back again to
Peter.
Yes, sorry.
I'll let you go back, but just let's keep it to 2 minutes.
Oh, so sorry about that. Yes, I'm sorry about that.
Okay. And of course, there will be more time for you, but I didn't want to interrupt you. So finish your sentence, and then I'll try to.
Okay. What Charlie wanted to say, that it is important to note that the history of climate change cannot be told without Africa. And the history of climate change didn't start 30 years ago, or didn't start with Friday for Future. The history of climate change must be defined from the period of extractivism, which is to date, the effect of that, which we Africans bear more than any other part of the world, although we are less contributing to the problems leading to that.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I actually don't know what to say, and I don't feel so comfortable anymore in drinking tea at the moment. But let me try to hand over to you, Brototi, because I think also you in your work, you think a lot about this. Yeah, I think a term that Peter didn't use, but that's very present in all what you said is power in the end. That it's a lot about power and who has the power to shape the narratives also of climate justice movements. So I would like also to hear from you and from your perspective, how do you think that power impacts the narrative? And how can we see that in the case of the history of climate justice? And I think as this is like a conversation, of course, you're very much invited to connect it to what Peter said, because I think he did it in a very great way, just going all over through history. But I think maybe from your perspective, there's still something to add and really tackling down to this aspect of power in shaping narratives of climate justice.
Thank you. No, I was thinking about so many things when I was listening to you, Peter, and I was trying to connect it with things that I know. So I'm going to try to link the understanding of power and the way narratives are shaped, but after connecting it with what Peter said, no? So there was this one phrase that he said in the beginning, saying like cropping us out of the picture, no? Like historically and even now. And Peter gave this very very good history of from the last 500 years, no, how it has been going on, who gets to write the narrative and how it is presented. And I want to talk a little bit about how it is still continuing, not just in the way extractivism is continuing in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, but also in the way that the climate justice movement is being formed here in Europe. And I think the fact that we have this space, space for organizing for BIPoC climate justice, it's important to bring these questions up, because I'm sure we all have read certain things, heard certain things, felt very uncomfortable, but then we don't find the support of people around us because we are not surrounded by people who generally, when you're in Europe, who see it the way you do. So I think I'm going to bring out certain issues that I have felt while reading or hearing or being in some events, and how that, and the amount of power dynamics that goes around in organizing. And I want to talk about an article that I read in the New Internationalist about the 2015 London Climate March, which was written by Alexandra Wanjiku-Calvert and Joshua Virasamy, who are part of the Wretched of the Earth collective. And they were saying how in the beginning, they were supposed to start the march, and then in the end, somehow they were sidelined, and not just sidelined, but had the cops being called on them because they wanted to talk about decolonization and exactly say what Peter was talking about, that this is not something which has started 30, 40 years ago. It comes with this history that is associated with it. It comes with the extreme violence upon environment and people in our continents. And we want to talk about this. And the main organizers were like, no, we have to give positive messages for climate action to work. And I will send you the link of this article, but they were saying how indignant it felt that one of the NGO narratives was that you have to appeal to the people to do something for climate change, and that do something was and I'm reading it. We do this hashtag for the love of skiing. For the love of skiing. And let us not forget that climate change does not affect everybody equally. The people who are doing it for the love of skiing are the people who will be the least affected with climate change. Let us be clear about this. Like, what are you fighting? You're fighting in one instance. No, what Ime was saying, you're fighting about the songs that you will never get to sing again, about the communities that are going to be lost, about like centuries of historical cultural ways of living that will be gone on one side, and on the other side you are comparing it with the love of skiing and the ridiculousness of this, and it keeps coming again and again and again in different ways of organizing. So the fact that the narrative, not just by people who have been exploiting and extracting, but also by people who you would want to call allies in climate justice, but doesn't always look that way. So what we were talking about before of an intersectional climate justice, I would add to that, we need a decolonial climate justice as well. We need a climate justice which acknowledges the colonial roots of climate injustices and is aware of the ways in which it will affect different communities, different people differently, and to give spaces and to give voices to know this coloniality of knowledge, this coloniality of power, this coloniality of justice, of epistemology. These things have to be very much present in having a radical critical narrative of environmental justice. Otherwise, as you were mentioning from before, no, both the literature and both the literature on environmental justice and climate justice is still very, very Eurocentric, is still very, very Western dominated. And it is only now that people in the last 4 or 5 years have been talking about decolonial environmental justice in academic literature. And it's not being talked about so much in climate justice literature yet, but you see a lot of grassroots mobilization around it. You see a lot of people talking about it, but it's not being picked up by academic literature. Why? Because who are the people who are writing these academic literatures? Who are the people who, what are the institutions in which they are sitting, and what are their own positionalities? So these things need to be questioned, no? And then you have this other shift, no, that you do not want to create too many problems within climate justice, because climate justice is already getting a lot of backlash from people who are climate deniers and who do not want to talk about it. So we shouldn't be fighting within the group, no? So what happens when you say you shouldn't be fighting within the group? It basically means all the black and the brown people can shut up, because you have to be together, and the narrative is being said by people in Europe and the US. And I have faced this personally when I went to my fieldwork, and when I saw that certain movements were not on climate justice, I felt extremely guilty for saying, but what am I doing? I want to have, like, I don't want to dismiss the climate injustices which are happening in this area. So maybe it's my fault, maybe I'm not able to see something. But then the more and more I see the way, for example, concepts of blockadia, concepts of like the way in which blockadia is understood now is any movement of direct action against fossil fuel in any part of the world can be considered blockadia, because in one way or the other, climate justice narrative is present. And this can be true for many, many, many of the cases. But one of the cases from India in which it was said that climate justice movement is present, and I went back to that place and asked the people there, I saw it was not present. So then it makes me question, are you just imposing a narrative without even checking the realities, or what is going on? So yeah, just these different different thoughts and different ways of
Yeah.
different questions that I have, which I hope maybe we can discuss together and come up with ways of organizing and doing things.
Yeah, thank you. I think one connection, or one thing we didn't talk a lot about so far is actually the diaspora. So the African diaspora, or the diaspora from the global south living in the global north. Yeah, probably Ine, you're already ready that this question will be directed towards you. So yeah, from your perspective, what do you think the challenges are for the first and second generation diaspora to feel connected to the struggles in their homeland, but also to have ownership of it? And if we, let's say, get even in a more constructive way, moving towards the future. So what are your own lessons of the work from the last 2 years, and what do you want to share with the new generation of kids who don't feel drawn to the white dominated spaces, but also want to work with climate justice issues in the places where they're living at the moment, for example, Germany?
Wow, that's two big questions.
Ah.
I will start with the first one. I think, I mean, we talk about a lot about reclaiming, and by that I don't mean taking ownership, because we don't own shit. You know, it's not, and I think we have to be very clear also as you know, I try to be very clear about it, and the collective, we try to be very clear about it, that we ourselves, being, you know, positioned in the global north, that comes with privileges, that comes automatically with having basically the foot in our sibling's neck. So, you know, and I think we have to address that. We have to speak about all of the ways in which we benefit from the system as well, which I don't think we're not meant to be the beneficiaries, but we kind of benefit by default by being here as well. And we have to be aware of that. And it's not about owning, but it's about sort of reclaiming our connection to it, and therefore also reclaiming and rebuilding our solidarity. And I think the problem that we have many times is that we have to kind of dig deep to hear about these movements, to hear about these fights. And perhaps also in the context of this country, where obviously many of us are fighting against racism, to connect these struggles and these fights. And I think in a way, for many of us who've been socialized, let's say in Germany and Europe, we've grown up with this feeling that somehow environmental issues are not so much for us, because in the German context, or European context, a lot of times, you know, when we think of environmental movements, white environmental movements in the global north, it's like they put the icebergs first. You know, it's about bees and birds and trees, but it's not about people. They don't talk about, you know, they don't talk about the rights of migrants. They don't talk about, you know, structural and systemic racism, and also how environmental movements have been very much complicit in perpetuating these. And I think we sort of somehow inherently, we feel that hypocrisy, whether we can name it or not. We feel it when we see it. And in a way, I think for many of us, when, you know, we don't want to be associated with that. We don't want to be associated with this white Western narrative that sort of fights for some humans, and we're aware it's not fighting for all humans. And it's, you know, by ways of, as we've already discussed, by ways of erasure, for example, from these narratives, from these images, from the solutions as well, you know. So I think part of when we say reclaiming, we mean reclaiming the history of these fights in a way, you know, being connected to these fights, being connected to these struggles. And that fights against colonialism, against racism, have in a way always been connected to fights against environmental destruction, environmental exploitation, extractivism, Western extractivism. And that also, and to reclaim in the Western context, I think, to reclaim these climate and environmental struggles is to also reclaim drawing these connections, which are very, very purposefully erased. And so the second, to the second question, commenting to the second question, I think it's perhaps very much, you know, important that we, rather than looking to build connections with movements and organizations that have historically failed us and have never addressed the issues of our communities. You know, it's sort of maybe if so by default, but not you know, putting them in the center. And I think last panel I was on with Peter, you know, gave a very, very good example of that in terms of Greenpeace, you know, and how Greenpeace has been has shied away in the past from connecting, for example, or engaging in fights, for example, in Nigeria, supporting the Mossop movement, and basically saying, I mean, that is true for also Asian and struggles on the Asian and continent in the in the Americas, that they have really, many environmental movements have really failed to connect the dots purposefully. So I think, you know, for us to kind of draw, like Peter said, draw attention away from changing something that never had us in mind in the first place, and really remembering and reminding ourselves that actually the fights, the majority of people fighting for climate and environmental justice are not represented by Greenpeace, and Greenpeace is not representative of them. And you know, to sort of join hands again, like with the global majority, and really, which is Black, which is Indigenous, which is of color, and make these connections there.
Yeah, thank you for raising all of these points. So I actually want to ask you, Peter or Prototi, if there's anything you want to add to actually facilitate.
Yes. Yeah, I'm getting a little bit
back with all.
I just wanted to add something to what Sister Emma has just brilliantly, her brilliant submission. And you see, there is one thing we have to also understand. When we talk about climate justice, we have to talk about climate racism. I'm sorry. And when we talk about environmental justice, we have to talk about environmental racism, because environmental justice is just it's a follow-up. It's just the result of environmental racism. And this environmental racism has a history that is dated back to well beyond, well over 500 years. And it is not only about it's not only about environmental destruction. It's always also about deprivation. It's always also about segregation. It's also about marginalization of the peoples in these different areas where we have raw materials in Africa, in Latin America, and so on and so forth. So we need to talk about that. You know, why I'm saying it is because of the question you asked Sister Emin, you know, about diaspora and the new generations and so on and so forth. You know, because we're talking about racism in Germany. I came in here when I was a little bit over 20. I was young, you know, and I had to learn everything here. You understand? So I came in here with a different culture, but we have those those of us here who were born here. My son is Afro-German, you know, so, and he has a different perspective because of the system he grew up in. And so he might not be able to, of course, I'm not sure he understands, you understand, but people might not be able to, will not be able to understand fully our perspectives, you know, because we come with a different history, with a different biography, with a lot of stories that you can't even, sometimes we can't even talk about them in order not to trigger some you understand what I mean, you know. So and I think that what I observe in this country is that all this while we've been thinking that we can fight racism here in this country without talking about Africa, without why are they racist to us? This is one we have to start to. I'm only talking about Africa for now, you know, because I'm from Africa, you know. It doesn't mean okay. Why are they being racist to us in Germany? Is it because you are called Eme? Is it because you are called Sister Obula? No, because of where you are coming from. That is, I'm not talking about your nationality, because this is how they associate you. This is how they judge you. And this is why they are able to even discriminate against you because of the color of your skin. So we're taking it back again to Africa. So that's why I always say that even when we want to make a change, if we want to solve the problem of racism here, if we even want to even think about stopping the use of N-word, for instance, we have to check it up from Africa. And this is where I found it that the new generation have been a little bit slacking about that. A lot of them settle for the comfort zones, you understand? And some of them do not even want to be associated with their roots. And if you don't know where you are coming from, how do you know where you are going to? So we have to think about that, because it's about identity. And this identity is not, you know, my friend Adebantu said in his song Niger Delta Blues, he said, capitalism is meant to protect its own. Capitalism is meant to protect its own. And the purpose, or let me even put it, the backbone of racism is capitalism. And capitalism is meant to protect its own. And we believe because we are born here, we are part of them. But you are not. In Germany, there's a kind of, there's what I call Falle, you know, a trap, you know, we always tend to fall into this hype. And they call it kulturelle Hoffnung. You know what I'm saying? You know, they use that to kind of tranquilize us, make us feel that we belong. Hey, you can only belong when you belong collectively. You can only belong when you belong collectively. And so long as people are being deprived of the right to be treated with dignity, because it's all about treating with dignity, then you will not belong. So we have to change that strategy. And don't forget that we that came in with different methods, different perspectives, different ways of handling things. There's always conflict in that way. We have to talk about it. But the youths that were born here have to start to rethink why they are being treated like this in this country.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, just don't want to say anything, but hand over to you, Rototi. I see that you're just writing a lot all the time. So I'm curious actually to hear reaction and to also get like a Indian perspective on what Peter just said. If you want, if you don't have all notes, I can give you a question, but I think there's no need for that as I see your face.
No, it's just very, like, so much to think about and so much to take in, to hear all of your perspectives. And yeah, I was just writing things down and trying to think it through and trying to think of experiences of belongingness and not belonging to a place, and when do you belong to a place, and know all our multiple positionalities that we live with. And yeah, I mean, I was really thinking, not like, if you don't belong, I mean, I agree, if you don't belong collectively, you don't belong. And it's also something I was also trying to link it back with one of the tactics that is used in a lot of environmental injustices, of breaking the collective of a village. I mean, this has been the tactics which was also used before during colonialism, of divide and rule, you know, like the first attack is you break the collective strength of a community, and then it is much easier to extract and to exploit. And I was trying to think of this whole understanding of identity, belongingness, and how intrinsically connected it is, and how in different ways it is being used and abused. And I wanted to give the example of Greenpeace from the Indian context, so to link it back a little bit with the climate justice mobilization there, is that Greenpeace did a very good campaign to stop coal mining happening in one of the richest, most biodiverse forest in central India. And then Greenpeace was basically kicked out of the country, saying that you are agents are from, like, you have foreign national interest to come in and you have no right to be here and tell us what to do, and just leave. So they basically stopped all funding for Greenpeace to happen. And recently they stopped and shut down Amnesty International in India. So we now have a right-wing government in the country, and basically all forms of social and environmental protest is being squashed down in an increasingly dangerous and scary way. So this is like a series of that happening, no? And I was trying to think that this understanding of climate justice in the international negotiations, no, they work on very like common but differentiated responsibilities, this is what they talk about. And like the global north, which has been emitting more and more carbon dioxide, should have different responsibilities than that from the global south. And this is something which India uses very, very cleverly to say that, yeah, we still need to develop. The country is energy poor, and so we cannot stop coal. And nobody can say anything about it because, I mean, it is true, we are still energy poor. But then what exactly happens? But then nobody questions how there is this internal colonialism happening within the country, that the fossil fuels which is used and all the extraction which goes on only benefits the pockets of a few, and it's the rest of them who continue to live in poverty, in exploitation, and marginalization. And more often than not, it is the indigenous people of the country who in the last, so there were some studies which said that in the last 60 years after the independence, the indigenous population, which is about roughly 9% of the population of India, has been the has been displaced, like 60% of that 9% of the population has been displaced. So that is how huge. No, it's always the indigenous people of the country who have been who are the worst off in this situation. And then I was trying to link this with what Peter was saying, that no, capitalism saves its own. So in the Indian context, capitalism saves the upper caste, the people in positions of power, the people who continued to be colonialist after the British left, because the system didn't leave. The system is still there, and it is now the upper caste people who benefit from it. And then we can try to take it here in the European context and see what happens. So these were some of the ideas that was playing in my mind. But I think I will stop here and let Ime continue.
Could you take some time away from me and give me 2-3 minutes and take it away from me, because she said something about Greenpeace. Emin talked about Greenpeace because we had an event on the 8th and 9th and 10th of November to commemorate the death of Ken Saro-Wiwa. And the issue beforehand, if you don't know, for those who didn't know, was that I contacted Greenpeace in the 90s, 1995, when these men were sentenced to death on the 25th of October, and asked them, yeah, okay, thank you a lot for sharing that, asked Greenpeace to come out and do something in such spectacular manners as they used to do, to create awareness, or at least to try to save the lives of these people. And the General Secretary then, Thilo Bode, who is now the CEO of Food Watch in Germany, told me that, sorry, Mr. Donatus, we cannot take care of all the problems in the world, and Africa is far away. It's something that traumatizes me not up to today, And we talked about it in a Greenpeace seminar or workshop online. And why I'm bringing it up, because both of you said it, and we did invite Greenpeace to be part of this program. We had a lot of organizations that took part. We invited Friday for Future and everybody. They were all in there. But Greenpeace was with us, started planning, and suddenly we got an information that, because they have some political parties taking part in this program, it's against the codex of Greenpeace. So they cannot officially take part. Why am I saying it? The history repeated itself again 25 years later, whether the reason be it legitimate or not. You're trying to get my point? And they actually came to the event on the 10th. And we are having a feeling, because we see pictures they're sharing, and that they didn't officially associate with us, but they came out with their banners and their t-shirts and their dress code for publicity, for something that they didn't want to take part in. And there were political parties that took part in this, and they were present on that day. So what is this? We are so, Germans would say, it's been sehr irritiert. I don't know how to explain it. My group, my organization don't know how to work on this now. You understand? Yeah. It's a kind of, is it a kind of exploitation? Did you come in there to do your photo session and say we were part of it, whereas you said you cannot be part of it? Where do you stand? Sorry, I just wanted to chip in that.
No,
just
let's get answer from Imi and all.
No answer. Just I was just holding up this book. Sorry, I didn't want to distract, but because it's from Kensaro Viva. It's called Flammen der Hölle. I mean, it's obviously also published in English. And Kensaro Viva also talks about what Peter just addressed. You know, trying to reach out to different environmental organizations when the movement was, I mean, really going strong, 300,000 people in the streets. And nonetheless, they said, so Africa is far away, you know. Yeah. So we shouldn't be surprised by it. It's still, it's a pity. But I think, you know, as today we've talked about so much, there is a system in this denial. And also it goes to, you know, not having to address the root causes, right? Because if you don't talk about it, if you don't address what all this is, has arisen from, if you don't go back to slavery, if you don't go back to colonialism, if you don't talk about racism, then you don't have to address it. And at the end of the day, you know, you can keep this structure of who, you know, the beneficiaries and who suffers from the consequences. You can keep it intact. You don't have to go to the root causes really at the end of the day. But it's important that we do, and that we call it out, like Peter does, and like Kensaro Viva already did in his book from the 1980s.
Thank you, Imi. Before we come to I try to wrap it up and have another cup of tea. I also want to ask our audience if there are any questions. I don't know if we will be able to deal with all of them, but you're very welcome to share in the chat if there's anything you want to hear from our guests. So I try to keep an eye on the chat. I cannot promise that I will see everything, but I'm trying. So feel free to share if there are questions. Yeah, and in the meantime, so for me, for today, I think we really got the problem by the roots. And a lot of times all three of you said came back to this point of, okay, we have to really tackle the problem from where it's coming from. We have to reclaim also the history of these fights, connecting it to colonial continuities, to racism, to just what Ime said. So I think what could be but a way also to end and to come to an end and for our morning discussions is to think of ways how to actually change these narratives of climate justice in the future, and what you actually ask the new generation, but also the current generation of climate activists to do. That would be very curious to hear your perspectives when it comes to future narratives for the climate justice movement, but also, well, taking it from all the lessons you have learned on a very personal level. As I don't see any questions in the chat, I would just start with whomever wants to start. You can give me a sign or just start talking. Peter,
No, there are questions. I'm seeing questions in the chat.
I don't see questions. I don't know.
Frage und Antworten steht da. FNA, not the chat.
Yes, I see it now. Okay. Well, I think the first question could already go into the same direction I said. So how to address some of these issues and what action can you take? So there would be curious to hear if the we is a white we or a BIPoC we. Yeah, who wants to answer the question of yeah.
I can try to answer a little bit. Also with my positionality more as a early career researcher. So I'm going to say how I see we can do something from the research perspective now. Well, one thing I think that what we're having right now, this conference, this space to have these discussions, and this space to meet other people who want to have this discussion. And all of you who have been organizing this is already a very good first step, no? To say that we are here and we are not just your diversity tick boxes in the different panels that you organize, but we are here, you know? So this is a very good starting point for me. The second thing is, so I'm going to talk a little bit about decolonizing. What I see is, well, one of the frustrations that I have with academia is that it is still, the way in which academia works is still that it is people from the global north, often white, male European or North American, who give these global theories of everything, which is what Peter was talking about before, no? Who write these grand narratives. And people from the global south are expected to write their case studies from their particular countries and to add or support these big theories. And I think what is really needed is to make our own narratives and to write more and more about those narratives. Because it is true that, and I will also try to connect this a little bit with the COVID crisis. No, there are these people who are writing books after books and papers after papers during a crisis, which is completely destroying. Well, I'm going to say my country. No, so I have to, half the time, so I'm sitting in Barcelona and things are not very good here also. So half the time my mind is what's happening here. The other half the time my mind is what's happening in India. The other half the time my mind is what do I do with my temporary residence permit situation. The other half of the time is it's not even half, it's like some percentages. So all this incredible emotional and mental things that you have to carry to just continue with your living, whereas there are other people in positions of relatively more privilege who can just sit and write from their desktop with their knowledge, with their very positioned knowledge, about what they think is happening in Africa and Latin America and Asia, and get published. And this is the narrative which everybody sees. So I feel the need to break this narrative. And it is a lot of hard work. Decolonizing academia is a lot of hard work. It is a lot of slow work, which is something which the current capitalist academia of production, you need papers out all the time, doesn't support in that. So for that, we need collectives. We need writing collectives, we need researching collectives, we need care collectives. I don't think we can sustain a movement if we don't take care of ourselves. And this is something which a lot of us are not taught to do, We are taught to keep fighting, keep giving ourselves till you are exhausted and burnt out. So we have to also change the way in which we do research and activism, of putting care at the center of it. So here I'm talking also more of feminist ways of organizing. And breaking the narrative of where knowledge is produced and what is valued as knowledge and who gets to produce those knowledges. So constantly questioning this. And I think I will stop here for now because I've been speaking for a while.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to raise the next question to Ime, and I think it connects again to what we've been talking about already, about the role of the diaspora. So what role can the diaspora play? I think we started, Peter already also shared about the responsibility, but maybe Ime, you can clarify a bit and get very concrete on the role of the diaspora in Europe.
In my opinion, it's to connect the struggles and to really use sort of the access that we have here to sort of take these demands from the global south as well forward. For me, one of the central ones is reparations, because all of what we talked about today, climate change is going to have real impacts. It's going, you know, like what you already said, it's going to you know, adapting to climate change. Also, all of these, you know, mitigating climate change. Obviously, all of this is very costly. Even like doing research on how countries are going to be affected, and it's also a problem that is very much, you know, part of this disparity between global north and global south. That a lot of the data we have here for the global north, or, you know, like even you just take Brandenburg or any other part of Germany, you know exactly, like they have data or calculations how the climate is going to change, what will grow and what will not grow, and farmers are being trained in preparing for that, and, you know, the experimentation, like pilot fields. All of this is not happening in the global south for the most part. And I think, you know, our demands here as part of the diaspora really also have to center in my opinion, like the interests of the global south. And again, like, you know, holding countries or governments here, or even just environmental organizations and initiatives accountable, and really looking at, you know, be it like plans from the policy side, or plans from the NGO, climate, environmental initiative organization side, to really decolonize those plans. Because, you know, all of what we talked about today, this long history of extractivism will continue, and it's planned to continue, even in the name of protecting the climate, or especially in the name of protecting the climate. What we will see, what is Germany, for example, or just like Global North is planning for, is a new wave of extractivism, that will really sort of present new sites of violence, where, you know, bauxite or lithium or all of these minerals will have to be mined, that will enable the global north to transition. So, you know, I think we have to call attention to that. That's where I see our responsibility, and to, again, connect fights, and really also demand that the demands of the global south are also heard from the global south, and not just via us. That's another thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Peter, I saw you writing a lot. You want to add something to what Emil said?
Oh, well, like to say, first of all, to what Emma already said about this new way of environmental, what do you call it? Environmental, this new way you used to
Extractivism.
Extractivism. Okay. And that's why I always refer to this new way, which the term green capitalism, and which we in German they call it grüner Kapitalismus. And this is one of those new ways, and that is causing some fears, and a lot of African intellectuals, and because we do not know what they mean by this, even when we can smell it already. You know, we can smell it to mean that we have to, Africa will need to be pressed more, you know, to get what they need for this their new way. Talking about, for instance, batteries, and you know, and how we get these raw materials, and how these batteries will be disposed of, and so on and so forth. And we have a long history of that, so we do not want to get into that hype from activists and political parties that want to make us believe that this is the solution. It's the solution for the Europeans, and perhaps not really a solution for us. But let me please appeal, and well, not an appeal, my suggestion, because we've been talking, what can we do? I believe that we need to start to, we need to really take it very serious. We need to promote ourselves. Because we spend more time promoting people that are not actually connected with the struggle. We spend more time promoting white activists. We have to promote ourselves. I take my biography as an example. Peter Donatus. You know, that's what I said last week. I said, we have very few people whose biography is the struggle, and the struggle is the biography. And what we see in Germany is that you see this setting up that, setting up that, setting up that. And in the community, especially in the Black community, you see rivalry, you see competition, you even see mobbing, all in the name of getting projects, finances for projects and all that. So what I mean is that I do not need anybody to promote me. I think I can promote myself, but we have a lot of people who are very active, in a lot of Black people and people of color, you know, and indigenous people who are very active, not only in Germany, but outside Germany. We need to start to promote these people. We need to, and last time we had the Niger Delta in the 90s. I need to, with some other people, we need to sneak into the country, Nigeria, you know, to get pictures, materials to run a campaign. You know, it was very dangerous. And we didn't get any finances for that. And if I look at it very well, we had an event just a couple of days ago, not a single cent we applied for. You understand what I'm saying? Not a single cent we applied for. In cooperation with all the organizations that were on board, we were able to carry out this event. But at whose cost? It's on the cost of activists. So we also have to think about not only promoting, but also making life better for these activists who take time out.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just have to connect it to one question that I see that fits very well, which is also coming from the audience, how to bridge the often observed disconnection between the abstract idea of climate justice and the real life struggle to make a living. Yeah, I just had to think about this question and listening to your statement. So is there anything you want to add, especially in how to actually connect it, facing like fighting for climate justice, but at the same time striving to make your own living day by day?
Oh yes, you know, this is Sister Prototi. Did I pronounce it very well? Okay, thanks. She said something. She tried to explain this in a very short. I don't know if you understood what she was trying to say. You know, she's in Barcelona, and you know, struggling and trying to connect the reality, the daily reality, with the struggle for climate justice. I can write a whole shelf of book of that. You understand? And this is not something I want to complain about, but when you live in this society and you are bold enough to come out to tell them the truth to their face about climate justice, you are seen as a radical. You are seen as somebody who should not get, even in the community. Even in the community. So you struggle every day to fight with that. So if you don't, if somehow they try to always crop you out because you are telling them what is going on, that sometimes, in the 90s, they got the intelligence after me just because I was just running a campaign in a democratic setup, So struggling between having your daily bread, earning your daily bread, because the time I spend for activism could have been the time I would need to do some write-ups, for instance, and earn some money. I wouldn't be able to do that. But there is then there is a vacuum and nothing is filling it up. I'm using me as an example, but it mustn't really be. But generally, we have this problem. And that's why we are having very few people coming out to say we want to do something against it.
So, Peter, what to do about it?
What to do about it? We have to not only connect, we have to build our own thing.
Yeah, thank you. So we have 3 minutes left. I try to end more or less on time, but I still want to share the questions that are there, and especially like to give to you, Ime or Brutoti, the chance to answer in case you want to. So the questions we couldn't answer have been: how do we hold mainstream climate organizations to account for including BIPoC and Global South? Then another question has been: does the panel have any suggestions for how to bring up a conversation about decolonizing the climate narrative with white allies? And a question directed towards you, Peter, which I would ask you to maybe answer in writing, if possible, is like: hi, thank you all for the input. I have a question for Peter. What do you mean with capitalism protects its own? For me, capitalism is a system, and its own would be maybe capitalists, but I had the feeling you meant it differently. Maybe you can elaborate this. So sorry, there will be no elaboration right now, but maybe in written. Yeah, so Prototi and Ime, is there anything you want to add to the two previous questions? I hope you didn't forget them. I can also repeat again.
Ime, do you want to go?
I haven't picked out a question yet, but I can go for one. I don't know. Do you have one in mind? Are you ready? Then
I was thinking of trying to answer the last question of suggestions of how to bring up a conversation about. No, actually the other one. How do you hold mainstream climate organizations to account for including BIPoC and Global South? So the thing is, what I see now is that they are including people from Global South and BIPoC, but it happens as a very, not ticking the diversity checkbox, as a very tokenist kind of an act. Because then the moment you start questioning, so like this question is already answered. What I'm trying to say is that they are including, they have all these little offices in different parts of the world, and they say no, like these international organizations are actually international with offices and campaigns everywhere, no? But then once you start talking to the people, or once you start talking to the brown and black people in the headquarters of these organizations, you realize they don't have any say. And at the moment, which is what Peter was also saying, you know, why people don't talk is because the moment you start making noise, you're kicked out. And I can give examples from international climate justice organizations. I can also give examples from academia. This is how it works, you know? You hear so many stories of the moment an African academic, an Asian academic goes to an institution and says, okay, let's change it like this, and let's do it like this. Let's include more writings from the Global South, and then you're like sidelined and not given projects. And then in the end, you're kicked out. So the accountability would come in not just having people in the organizations, but actually incorporating what they are saying and actually being, yeah. So this is how I would see it happening.
Yeah, thank you. So we're running out of time, unfortunately. There won't be a lot of time for the other questions, but I hope we'll all just keep in touch online and continue discussing. But to actually end our tea round, so these ridiculous little sentences always on teas, right? This thing is like, oh, life is love and love is everything. So as a challenge to have a very short final statement, I would ask our guests of the tea round to formulate a tea, how do you say it even? I don't know what's the word. Like this little sentence and wish you put on the tea bag. So it's very short. So we only have like 4 to 6 words. But I think it can have a great impact. So whomever is ready to share their tea vision with our audience to come to an end. And the question I think could be, narratives for the future or your visions and wishes put into very little words to end our tea round. I didn't announce that, so it's all spontaneous. We're live and online, so let's see if there's ideas for short sentences. Who wants to start? Okay. Silence for the first time in this discussion. Okay.
I'm trying to think of a quote from Arundhati Roy, and I think I'm going to misquote it, but I'm still going to try. She says that there are no voiceless people in the world. There are only the deliberately unheard and the forcefully sidelined. And I think this is how I will end it.
Short statement for the end.
Well, I will leave maybe the visions to Peter. I don't know if you've noticed, but these slow quotes you're talking about, like in the last couple of years, they've gotten also a bit negative sometimes. It used to be like, oh, happy and lovey, and then at some point it got a bit negative. So I'm sticking to reality here. And I would just say, if your movements, initiatives, organizations are not intersectional, are not anti-racist, are not anti-colonial, then they're, bye, ciao, they're done. They're obsolete.
Nothing to add. Peter?
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing young people coming up, connecting, but let me use, pardon my French, running our own share. You understand what I'm saying? Because we feel that we have to do it now. And creating such forums is part of it. Creating projects, research, and all that. We shouldn't wait for the white-dominated society to do this for us or to call us to do this. I love you all for picking up this initiative. And there is this WhatsApp group which Dodo put me in there, and I'm proud to be there too. And I'll continue to support in any way possible when it comes to empowering youths with our experiences, because it's something you cannot do without actually, and that part of my experiences, I will conclude that by saying that it is totally wrong for Europe to own 11 million hectares of land in Africa, a size that is a size that will be enough to feed about 65 million hungry Africans. Please take that home. Take that home that we have to stop this. 11 million hectares of land in Africa owned by Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank the three of you. For me, it was an honor to be here and to get the chance to talk to you. And actually, that's it already. So applause from me and the audience, and I think everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for the wonderful moderation.
Please, I'll get back to you.
Before leaving, I'll